I wanted to make sure the narrative was about the team and not me. We were still winning and ended up going to the national championship game that year. I was super proud of Fromm. He's a hardworking dude. But taking a back seat for that, it was tough. It was tough mentally. That was Jacob Eason on the Bring the Juice podcast, which I think was really well done. Look back at Jacob's time at Georgia. And, he goes through and talks about a lot of different stuff. He said, I was pushed out of bounds late and injured my knee on the second game of the season in 20. I'll fill in the blanks for him. Second game of the season. It's actually the first game of the season. Second series is what he said. First game of the season, second series. He said, I know this is my team. I earned this spot. I worked for it. But at the end of the day, if you can't go, you can't go. He said, the guys I put in the work with, you have nothing to show for it on Saturdays. You're on the sidelines with the clipboard and the headsets on. Very difficult, man. I mean, that time at Georgia was so it's hard to go back and recapture everything. I wanted to go see Jacob, watched him play in 2015 up in Seattle, Lake Stevens. If you want to call it Seattle, you can, I guess. Or I'm going to call it Seattle. And there was so much. There's only one other player that I can remember in my lifetime that had that much pressure going on them to go to Georgia when they got to Georgia, which was Isaiah Crowell, and it didn't end well for Isaiah either. And for Jacob, I'm going to put on the screen, what it was like the week after he got hurt. This was a shot of Jacob on the sideline at Notre Dame where his father, Tony, played. He was a tight end over there. And, it was supposed to be a big coming out party for Jacob Eason. The 2017 season was. Jacob, again, this was the hard part about that time at Georgia was it was really it had become centered on one player, which was Jacob. And that is such an unfair way. I mean, the burden on this guy was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. And he just, when he got hurt, that was kind of it. I mean, that was it. And I had tremendous sympathy for him. I still do. Here he is getting hurt. And I don't know what happens. This was let me tell you what's happening here. So I was right there, as you can see. So Jacob tried to walk over to the sideline, and Kirby, Ron Kors, definitely Kirby was screaming at him to get down. And this was the shot of Jacob right by Nick as he tried to come back across the field after getting hurt. And you could have heard a pin drop in the stadium. I mean, it was a bad moment at Georgia for sure. And I mean, Nick had probably, Nick knew what that feeling was because, 2 seasons before that, he was laying on the ground at Neyland, knowing he had a real knee problem. Here's Jacob coming off the field with Kirby tapping him on the helmet. I mean, it was bad, man. I mean, it was not a good time, moment, whatever you want to call it. And he just, let me get back to me here. The thing about it that was so unfair to me, in my view, was that, Jacob had been anointed by way too many people about what he could be or what he would be. And the problem was that we just don't know what any of these guys, the more I've done this, the longer I've done this, the more I can tell you that we just don't know what these players will be like when they play. There was no bigger recruit in Kirby's time than Jacob Eason, period. And for it to turn out the way that it did, this is just after their first game together. Jacob didn't start this game. He was supposed to. That's another story for another day. And there's Kirby, very young looking Kirby Smart. We all have aged way too much. But that was a tough time, man. What could have been at Georgia, under Jacob was vanished. And it shows how quickly sports can go away for you, no matter who you are, how gifted you are, whatever the moment in time is, it just, they don't win that North Carolina game without Jacob. I'm going to tell you that right now. That does not happen because Grayson Lambert wasn't beating those guys. Here he is on the sideline. Kirby looks like he's 12 in that photo. But that was a transitional time at Georgia. Jacob was trying to there he is celebrating that long throw. Here's with Jim Chaney. That was a different time at Georgia, man. They had a lot to prove still. And it wasn't that there was no certainty that this was going to work with Kirby Smart. There was no certainty that this was going to work with Kirby Smart. And the thing about it was that, Jacob was the key, right? He was the person that was supposed to be the ringleader of the future at Georgia. And look at that offensive line. That's not an offensive line that is predicated on winning national championships. No offense to the people I actually know on that offensive line. But, things changed dramatically the next year for Georgia. And Jacob just wasn't the quarterback. And, I don't think I have images of this, what I'm going to talk about next, but I remember being at Vanderbilt in 2021. And there's just a couple stories about this Vanderbilt game. All right. Not 2021, 2017. Only one story about this game. Georgia, I'd been on the field shooting, and I went up to the press box because the game they were just destroying Vanderbilt. And so I walked up to get a jump start on things. And you can see Jacob's the brace on his left knee there. He never saw getting hit. And there he is coming off the field. I think that's either the last time he threw the football or the last time he played at Georgia. I'm not sure. I'm going to say this about Jacob, okay? This is something I've never talked about publicly. And I'm not going to kind of get into it too deep. But here's the one thing about Jacob as it relates to his sacrifice to a program that he knew he would not be at the next year. There was a lot of trepidation amongst him and his family about should he stay at Georgia for the national championship game, because that precluded him from going to Washington briefly. And Georgia could have gone into that game without a backup. I think the backup would have been Stetson at that. I can't remember who the backup would have been, but I'll just say this. Jacob decided to stay. And, I'm not trying to make the guy a saint, because he wasn't a saint. I'm not trying to make it more than what it is. But I just remember that I can certainly affirm to you that he was not, there was a lot of concern from his camp about, should we stay here and be the backup for this game? And the answer to that question was yes. With no certainty of what was going to come next. I mean, that's the part about all of this that, in a way, Jacob was there before things just got huge at Georgia. And he was the person that was supposed to take Georgia to the promised land. And he didn't. This guy did. That's Stetson Bennett warming up. That's Stetson Bennett warming up in the national championship game against Alabama in 2017 national championship game. Okay? That's the guy that did it. That's the amazing thing about sports, is that, you don't know who's going to get it done for you, or if they ever will. And, in the case of, Stetson, I'm just rolling through these pictures right now. There's no way possible any of us could have known what was coming in that moment, because it was so unpredictable that Stetson Bennett would be the person to lead Georgia national championship. People would have thought, oh, it'll be Jake Fromm. Understandably, I think Jake Fromm could have led them to it had had they not lost this particular game. And Jacob took all of the negativity, all of the burden of expectation, all of it. He had that on his shoulders. And not just that, but when he, for him to suffer through, and he did suffer, man. I mean, Jacob suffered. If you didn't know that, he suffered a lot. And, he was there on the sideline when this happened. Devonta Smith, game-winning 41-yard touchdown. I was right there too, clearly. And that night was a painful night for a lot of Georgia fans. I remember talking to Curtis Compton, who is a photographer and has been forever for the AJC. And he talked about how tough that one was for him. But, he still had to do the job. And, it was no different for Jacob. He had to go out there and, get the job done when he was not going to be the guy. So I had a lot of sympathy for Jacob, and saw him quite a bit. I mean, put him on the cover of the magazine, or was going to when they stopped the magazine. But he that was a tough time. The lessons, though, that came out of that time at Georgia are that, Kirby was never going to be dependent on any one player, period. That was never going to happen. And that's why he recruited Jake Fromm, et cetera. And it wasn't just Jake. It was a lot of guys that were recruited to Georgia that maybe didn't work out or whatever. I mean, that happens a lot. But you think about JT Daniels, you think about Dwan Mathis, but certainly JT Daniels, Jamie Newman, those guys, it didn't work. It just didn't work out. I mean, Carson Beck, people would talk about Carson, but Carson Beck started almost 30 games for Georgia. I mean, that worked out fine for him. But in the grand scheme of things, I met Jacob when he was going into his senior year, and then Mark and them got fired, which really hurt the Easons, I think. And, Jacob became Georgia's prodigal son. And I think that is a tremendously difficult burden to have. I remember G-Day, man. If y'all don't remember G-Day in 2016, I mean, you'd have thought when he came into that game, you could hear the insane expectations that day. I mean, it was noticeable. It was absolutely wild how much people wanted not just Jacob to succeed, but Georgia to succeed because of Jacob. And it was a lot, man. I mean, it was a lot. And, he had to get through that 16 season. He did not play well against Georgia Tech. He did not play well against South Carolina. He did not play well against Florida. But he had enough plays to get them to a win, against TCU, against Auburn, the plays that he made against Tennessee, Missouri. I mean, there was a lot there. For every, Ole Miss game or Nicholls State, he had Missouri, or he had the way he played against Tennessee, the game-winning drive against Kentucky. There was a lot of good and bad that freshman year with Jacob, but that's what it's a lot like when you have inexperienced quarterbacks, and he certainly was. And people, I probably need to reach out to him again and see if we can do something a little bit more in detail about his time at Georgia and just so forth. But that was definitely a transitional time at Georgia, and he was part of that transition. Not that he wanted to be, and going from him to Fromm, but really not. I gotta say, it wasn't really him to Fromm. Okay, it was the old offensive line and defense to the new offensive line and defense. Because once Andrew got there, and like things changed quick at Georgia, and Jacob just was the starter for one of those games. That's really what it was, and then they just took off from there. Boom.